can do anything. Yeah, hell no, hell no.
Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. So as promised, we're on episode 2 of how to be a self-made author. But before I go further, please make sure you like or comment this video at the end if you really liked it, or share it with someone who you know is writing a book. Also, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. But without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So editing is super freaking important because you don't want to put out half-ass work on the internet or on a hard copy, whatever you decide to do for your book. It is extremely important. And with that being said, it is the most expensive thing thus far that I've paid for. So I'm going to break down really quickly as far as the difference between going with a publishing company and doing it yourself, and the editing part per se. If you check out my Instagram, I talk about how I did my editing. I went through Fiverr.com. So Fiverr.com is a freelance company where people would just kind of say, hey, I can do this for you for $15, or I can do this for you for $25, or whatever the amount is. And it's really cheap and inexpensive and affordable, and it kind of gets you the work done a little bit fast, and you can see the people's work as well. And I also used another site that I can't think of. I want to say it was called Freelance or something like that. I'll post the link down below. But I would semi-recommend it, and I wouldn't. It honestly depends on your budget and what type of quality of work you're trying to put out. I first reached out to publishing companies when I initially started writing my book, when I was about maybe a quarter into it. And one of the things that I found out was that in the packages that they give you, a lot of times either editing or formatting is not included in the publishing package. The only thing they include a lot of times is the cover, or they'll include the distribution or the marketing or something like that, or just being able to put their name on your company, on your book. Basically, I didn't want that. I wanted to own all the rights to it. A lot of the times they don't tell you how much these companies take from you, which is about 30%. That's the average, is 30%, which is a lot. Okay, and I wanted to keep most of my earnings, so I decided to self-publish. And even when I reached out to the companies, I asked them, oh, okay, so is editing included in that, or is formatting included in this $1,200 package? And they were like, no, that's separate, and that's sometimes 10 cents to, I think I heard someone say like 33 cents per word. And if I had 69,000 words, give or take, it was coming out to about $1,200 on top of the $1,200 that they charged me for publishing. I did not have that kind of money, so I reached out to Fiverr. Fiverr was also about just as expensive. On average, I was looking at about $500 to $700, and that was the cheapest. I ended up biting the bullet and doing it. I paid a total of about $1,200 again for editing, and I had my book edited by outsiders a total of, I want to say, about 4 times. It was a lot. And the first person I went through, they didn't really understand. I think it was like a language barrier. Some of the things that I was saying, like I would say that's a doggone shame, and they were like, what did you mean by that? And I'm like, huh? Like, that's English, you know, like, what are you saying? So I think it was a language barrier, and I quickly realized that that wasn't going to work. So I got my money back. Also noticed that they left out a lot of mistakes. And I was catching the mistakes, so I got my money back from that one. But they edited like a few stuff. They edited the first part better than they did the second half. So then I went through another editor, which was super cheap. I think I paid her like $60 or maybe $120, if that. And it takes them on average about 2 weeks. My book was 200 pages, so if your book is about 200 pages long, it might take them about 2 weeks to fully edit it. So keep that in mind. And she did okay, but again, it was like they do really great on the first half of my book, and by the time they got to the second part, the last 100 pages, it's like they started slacking. I started finding like small errors here and there. Then I went through another editor, and at this time I was kind of fed up. I just gave him the first half of my book while I finished editing the second part from the other editor. And he edited the first half. I reread it. It was great. But at that time, I just felt like he was more so giving me feedback on my work instead of editing my work, and that was a bit pet peeve for me. I don't want people to read it for enjoyment. I want you to read it to be critical and find the errors and grammatical errors. And the last editor I had, I actually spoke with her over the phone. She was referred to me by someone else who I knew who was writing a book, and she was really great, very professional. Average again was about $500 or $800, one or the other, I can't remember. But that was even for freelance work. They were charging average anywhere from $500 to $800. So keep that in mind. Also, there's a difference in the different kinds of editing, which I didn't know before. So there's line editing, which is where they go line by line. Then there's content editing, which is where they just tell you basically if the story even much flows. You know, it's kind of like they're just reading it just to read it, and oh, that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. You repeated that idea, you didn't complete that idea. But they don't do grammatical editing. Then you have people that go in and do grammatical editing. So that's what I mostly got done, because I knew that my story made sense because it was done in like chronological order, like it really happened to me. So I knew that I wasn't doing like novelties. But if you're doing like a novel, then it's important to go through not only content editing but then line editing. So you might be paying for editing twice. So that's also another thing to keep in mind. A few recommendations that I have is to edit in batches. So let's just say you're writing and you plan on having different topics that will be each chapter. Edit for every chapter. Like after you finish one chapter, send it off to get it edited. Make sure that it's done, you read it, it sounds great, then go to the next chapter and, you know, start doing it like that. I wrote my book entirely and then went and got it edited, and it was very overwhelming. I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have broken it down in parts, because it would have been easier for me to go back and having to read my entire book, and I'm not a reader, so it was a lot for me to go through my entire book and then go through and point out, you know, the different things that were wrong with it. It was just very overwhelming. So I wish that I would have broken it up a little bit, and it also would have been cheaper for me, because, you know, I finished the first part 6 months ago, you know, and I almost forgot what I said. And if I would have, you know, gone ahead and edited that, sorry, I can't talk, and got that done, then I could have focused on the next part, then the next part, and by the time the book was finished, the entire thing would have been completely edited and completely done, you know, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. I think it's really a lot having the entire book done and then going back and having to refix everything. It can take a lot of time, and it took me about 2.5 months to go back and do all of that, which is why I ended up having to push back my book signing party to the 9th. It was originally supposed to be in July. So that's something to think about. But those are just my highly, really big recommendations. It's just, number one, making sure that you find an editor that I feel like you can actually talk to and call on the phone and be like, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for, because sometimes when you're typing, they can't really understand, or you never know if it's a language barrier, if they're taking what you're giving them and transmitting it the same way that you are. So I feel like having to either see them in person or talk to them on the phone is extremely important. I had my friends read my book as well and tell me if something made sense or if it didn't. So my friends kind of did my content editing. So that's also a choice, but picking the editor is really important. I would definitely just make sure that you use someone who's really professional. You pay the money, get it done right the first time, instead of going through the kind of like the freelance thing like how I did, because I ended up spending more money than what I really wanted to. And then also making sure that your time frame works, and don't rush them. Make sure that you give them their time to read it through. It's also really important to pick an editor who doesn't have a lot on their plate. If they're editing 5 to 6 books at the same time, their eyes are going to be really tired and they are going to miss up on stuff. So I think it's really important to find an editor who decides to take on maybe 1 or 2 projects at a time, because keep in mind, sometimes editors, especially if they're freelance, they work full-time on top of editing books. So you want to make sure that a lot of their time is devoted to just yours. So that's something that I feel like is really important to look into. And don't be afraid to go through freelance editors, but really make sure that you ask a lot of critical questions like, can I call you? Or how many projects are you working on right now? Do you work on multiple projects at one time? If you do decide to go through a publisher, a lot of times their work is guaranteed, but I would still go back and make sure that you read your book. And I would definitely say for the last recommendation is to edit in segments. You would save so much money doing that, and it would be so beneficial on you to have to go back and double check, and you always need to go back and double check. And last tip of advice that I have in editing is that you will need to get it edited more than once. What one person might catch, the other person might not catch, and everyone has different levels of experience when it comes to grammatical errors, as far as, you know, maybe they have a journalism education, or they're in writing or something like that. So that's important to think about as well. And when I was doing the freelance to begin with, one of the freelancers told me that she actually couldn't take on my project because she already had another project on the table, and she doesn't like to take on more than one project, which I thought was really good. And she also told me to keep in mind that you will have to have more than one person edit your book. So if one person, the first person who you pay, charges you like $1,000 to edit, I don't know, 200 pages, that is a little bit of a lot, to be honest. And also keep in mind that they're not going to be the last person to edit your book. You will need to get it edited at least 2 to 3 times in order to make sure that it's completely perfect. And I did that through freelance, but I also didn't pay that much. I was paying like $500. I was trying to find the cheapest route out, and they missed a lot of important stuff. And my book is actually already published, and I already found 2 mistakes in it. So it's really important just to make sure that you take your time, and the money that you spend is worth it, and that there's no mistakes. And there always will be like maybe one, you know, or maybe a comma should have gone here and it shouldn't, but words should never be like misspelled, you know. And I found 2 misspelled words, which I was completely livid. Like, I was so upset. So just make sure that you also take your time and reread their work and make sure that it's correct as well. But hopefully this information was pretty helpful to you and not too overwhelming. But like I said, every Sunday I will keep giving you these small tips, and if you need mentoring, then please feel free to email me. I'll be happy to walk you through the process, tell you which companies that I've talked to and what they're offering up front. That way you can kind of get an idea, and I'll be sure to help you out the best way that I can, and also give you some of my personal contacts as well for people who've helped me edit or do like a cover or anything like that. I'll give you their names and links and things like that, but just make sure you email me. But I hope that this was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will talk to you all next Sunday.